Alexei Ratmansky is here, and we're delighted to have you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's just an
Thank you for having me.
with us.
Sorry about me being late.
That's quite a. You had a very good excuse, and we're just delighted to have you with us. I don't think there's a ballet devotee anywhere in the world who has not heard of you and is not familiar with your work. And we're all very excited to have this wonderful production of Giselle by the United Ukrainian Ballet coming to London. So thank you for taking the time out of what must be an incredibly busy schedule to be with us.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Thank you. So I will now hand over to Graham Watts, and gentlemen, take it away, please.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, everyone, and especially, of course, welcome to Alexei. I hope you got your breath back from the rush from the rehearsal. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to have this chat with Alexei, even more so to have 100 or so people listening to us. Couple of housekeeping things from me. I'm in an unusual place and I've had a couple of Wi-Fi interruptions. So if suddenly you can't see or hear me, Susan is going to jump in to the void until I get back. Hopefully that won't happen, but we all know what can happen with Zoom. And secondly, I've got a very large and sometimes very noisy dog in the house. And although he's under strict instructions to be quiet, you can never quite tell with very large and noisy dogs. So if you hear some barking, you'll know what it is. Of course, we're going to talk about Alexei's remarkable career as a dancer, as the director of the Bolshoi from 2004 to 2008, a comparatively brief period, but I guess that it being the Bolshoi, it probably seemed like a lifetime to Alexei, and in his role as an artist in residence at American Ballet Theatre. However, of course, we have to prioritize what has happened in Ukraine. I was going to say over the last few months, but in reality, of course, it goes back to 2014 and probably even further. And in particular, to talk about Alexei's role in, first of all, outspokenly opposing the Russian invasion, in promoting artists who have spoken out against Russia, and of course, in the creation of the United Ukrainian Ballet and the performances of a new interpretation of his Giselle, especially created for the company, which opens at the Colosseum, the London Colosseum, in 6 days' time. We've seen the trailer. We were going to see it later, but we've seen it already. And I sincerely hope that those of you in or near London, and I know we've got viewers from all over the world, but those of you who are able to have either already got your tickets for this very important occasion, or you'll be getting them after listening to Alexei this evening. Before we start our conversation, and perhaps allowing Alexei to get his breath back, I think it's really important to pay tribute to you, Alexei, both personally and on behalf of the wider ballet and international community, for the leadership you have shown in support of the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian culture, and Ukrainian artists in particular, not only in being outspoken yourself, but in using your profile and social media platform as a medium for promoting statements from those artists who stand with Ukraine, each post always introduced by those two large red exclamation marks, showing us some beautiful extracts of Ukrainian ballet, work and artists that I've certainly never seen before, such as Evgenia Ershova and Lydia Gerasimchuk, who sadly died very young, two dancers of whom I was unaware until Alexei published the film of them. So thank you very much for that. And of course, highlighting the horrific everyday realities of the Russian invasion. The Ukrainian flag has never been far away from Alexei's hands at curtain calls, whether holding it alongside Christine Shevchenko at the Met after the premiere of Love and Rage, or alongside Joaquim de Luz in Madrid. So on behalf of all of us on this call, I wanted to start by thanking you most sincerely for the leadership you've shown. It's been an example to us all. And of course, all of this culminates with the United Ukrainian Ballet and Giselle, which premiered in this new form last month in The Hague. And I'm going to come full circle to that at the end of our discussion. But I wanted, first of all, forgive that long, but I think necessary preamble. I hope you've got your breath back. And let's start by looping to your earlier career. So Alexei, you were born in St. Petersburg You trained at the Bolshoi Ballet School in Moscow. And with this Russian background to your early life, it would be very interesting for you to explain your association with Ukraine.
I grew up in Ukraine. My parents lived in Kiev. My mom is from Leningrad and dad is from Kiev. So she traveled to Leningrad to give birth to my sister and then to myself. But they lived in Kiev, so I grew up there. But I want to stop and thank you for your kind words. It was really touching for me. So I lived in Kiev until I was 10, and that's when I entered the Bolshoi school and graduated in 8 years, and then joined Kiev Ballet. So my first 6 years, my first years of professional career was with National Opera of Ukraine. It's one of the most beautiful opera houses. It has a history. It was built at the end of the 19th century, I believe. The company, Ukrainian company, State Ballet of Ukraine, has been there performing since before the revolution, I think, 1910s, if I'm not mistaken. And when I joined the company, it was first class with more than 100 dancers, big repertory, all classics, some Soviet titles like Spartacus, Legend of Love, few national ballets, Ukrainian ballets like Song of the Forest and others. And the principals, the stars who were unique artists, they were really brilliant dancers from whom I learned quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I did all my corps de ballet parts there, then solo parts and principal parts. And after 6 years, I think, that was 1992, Iron Curtain was not longer preventing us from going abroad. And I was one of the first to leave the company, to leave the country and to go abroad. My first Western company was Royal Winnipeg Ballet in Canada. And you just sign a contract and you're allowed to go and you're allowed to return. So it was a completely different world at that time. After 3 years in Canada, I returned to Kiev and I spent another 2 years. That's when I started to choreograph. And then I and my wife, Tatiana, we joined Royal Danish Ballet and moved to Copenhagen, where we spent 7 years. Our son Vasily was born there. And in 2004, I stopped dancing because I was invited to Moscow to head the Bolshoi, and we moved to Moscow.
You're a wonderful interviewee, Alexei, because you've just answered about 10 of my questions in one go.
Okay.
So thanks for that. But
let's move on to the next 10.
Just going back to the sense of belonging, I read something recently that my friend Marina Haas, an American dance writer, wrote about your sense of belonging. And she quoted you as saying, "I was the boy from Kiev when I studied in Moscow. And when I danced in Kiev, I was the foreigner from Moscow." And I've felt that very acutely, actually. I just wondered, has the war intensified your sense of belonging to Ukraine, or has it always been the same?
No, yes, it did indeed. Probably the first place where I didn't feel like a foreigner was New York. It felt like it didn't matter where you come from. You just need to deliver. And I always felt that my professional side is Russian. I have Russian ballet school, and most of my choreography also is I used Russian music or Russian themes. And then the 24th of February happened. And the last 6 months have been, it's a huge change for me. And I probably need more time to be able to, speak about it calmly. But it's a struggle. It's really a struggle because it's just really hard to understand how Russia could have committed this crime of attacking Ukraine, because every second Russian have family in Ukraine and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So the connection is so tight. And of course, the history of Russia, it came from Kiev, the religion, the language, the writing, it comes from Kiev. It's almost, I've read it somewhere, and that's how it feels. It's almost like raping your own mother.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not in any way as involved as you are, and I don't have family in either country, but as a dance writer, I would visit Russia every year at least, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. And now at my age, I can see that maybe I will never go back there again. But I try to imagine how that must be for you with family there, with all your history of being there. I mean, can you see yourself going back to Russia in the future?
It's hard to imagine at the moment.
Yeah.
But you learn how to take things in perspective. I mean, there are things that are worse than not being able to visit Russia. People are dying every day, and that's what matters. It has to stop.
Mm.
And then we'll resolve all the other problems, I think. The first thing to do or to hope for is for the war to stop.
Yeah, I totally understand. Well, we're going to come on and talk much more about the Ukraine situation and the gala at the end, but we sort of whizzed over your training and your dancing career, and I just wanted, just for context really, to go back to your training. You were 10 when you started training, I think you said. Do you come from a ballet or performing arts background at all?
No, not at all.
So there's no. So how were you first attracted to ballet at the age of 10, or was it just you were kind of handpicked because of your aptitudes, etc.?
I did gymnastics. My father was a gymnast when he was young, and my mom took ballet classes when she was young. I was always dancing when I heard the music. The friends of family suggested he should do dancing or ballet. The ballet seemed to be like a very respectful career. The one that would allow you to travel, and most of the other professions wouldn't allow that. You would, be locked in Soviet system. My dad went to Moscow for work. He brought me with him. We saw the poster, the Bolshoi school takes students. And I remember him asking me, do you want to try? And I said, yes, let's try. No one believed that I can get there, but actually I did. And I don't think I did any dancing before, apart from, home little performances. And then in a year or 2, I started to succeed, and I started to like it, and then I started to love it. And then by the end of this 8 years of education, I knew that's what I want to do for life, and I had no doubts.
Do you remember the first ballet you saw? What was it?
No, I don't. I don't. I probably saw some performances in Kiev because parents always brought me to exhibitions or performances, ballet, opera, or music. I remember that one of the first Bolshoi performances they saw was Don Q with Vasiliev and Maximova. That was very impressive.
Wow.
Not the performance by itself, but the audience reaction. That was wild. It was wild. It was like half an hour of screaming and flowers, you know, falling down from on stage from the rings.
You mentioned the Kiev Opera House, and of course that was your first place of employment as a dancer, as you mentioned earlier. I've had the great privilege of going there many times, and it really is a beautiful gem of an opera house. And I hope in better times, people in the audience who haven't had the chance to go there will go there. What was your first professional role on stage? Do you remember as a soloist, perhaps even your first breakthrough role as a principal?
There was a year of Chernobyl. So somehow the beginning of my season was a bit messy because my parents insisted that I spend summer somewhere else. And I remember I had to come to work August 1st, but I arrived months later. By that time, the company was on tour. It was a little group that they were still able to perform Giselle and Swan Lake. Most of the company was on tour. So I think I was right away given a Pace and Pie in Giselle and Pas de Trois in Swan Lake. And then when I arrived, I remember the dancers who were used to dance this part, they were like really surprised, who is this guy taking our roles? There was a bit of a tension, but my first director was a brilliant dancer and choreographer, Valery Kofton. He danced with Maya Plisetskaya quite a lot, and there are quite a few recordings of him and his wife, Tatiana Tayakina. They were big stars of Kiev Ballet. And he was my mentor, and he rehearsed with me, and I danced with her. So these two were a big influence on me in the first year.
Wonderful. I mean, of course, what we don't really know is that there's a beautiful repertoire of Ukrainian ballets. You mentioned the Forest Song. That's probably the most famous of them. And you know, it's a shame really that we don't see those ballets anywhere else. They're just, you know, they're kind of enshrined within Ukraine. But you must have danced a lot of those.
I think, and I hope that we're going to see more of them.
I hope so. I really do. Of course, you mentioned that you then moved on to Winnipeg in Canada, and of course, what I guess most of us know about your dancing career best of all is the time that you spent with Royal Danish Ballet. It's a long dancing career to sum up in a few words, but what are the most memorable highlights and fondest memories that you have as a dancer anywhere really, in Canada, in Copenhagen?
In Canada, well, I actually left Kiev because I sort of danced all the principal roles that I wanted to do. And I didn't see, we didn't have premieres, we didn't have choreographers coming. We had 2 or 3 house choreographers. And the rep, I didn't see it enriching, you know, it's, so the only chance for me to find a new rep was to move somewhere else. Winnipeg had a genius ballerina, Evelyn Hart. She was very, very special. The musicality, the intelligence, the courage in her interpretations. She was a very extraordinary artist. And I think for the first time, I realized that you're allowed to do whatever you want on stage. There are rules, but you're free to break them. And that was a big eye-opener for me. And the director was also brilliant, John Mean, Australian, later a star of ABT. And he also gave me many chances. For the first time I danced Tudor, Balanchine, Neumeier. Professionally speaking, I think the biggest revelation for me was Balanchine classes, because we had some Balanchine people coming, staging his works and also teaching classes. And I found them absolutely fascinating. From nature, I was heavy built. I had big muscles, and I always wanted to elongate my lines. And with Balanchine class was a balance between very slow and very fast. I learned how to move without using my muscles all the time. And I suddenly, in a week or two, I saw my muscles elongating. I was very happy about it. And then when I returned to Kiev and danced with the company again as a guest, people came to me saying, your body has changed. And that was a proof for me that the Balanchine is very good for, for me. And I wanted to join City Ballet. I auditioned 2 times with no success, but there was a place where I wanted to dance. And then after 3 years in Winnipeg and 2 years back in Kiev, I was looking for a place where I can gain more knowledge. And Copenhagen was one of the places that I was dreaming of because of their classical tradition, classical 19th century tradition, which is not Russian. And that is of Bournonville, of course.
Mm-hmm. And that must have been a big challenge to move into a completely different style of dancing, particularly when you talked about the muscularity and the elongation, and then you move into the kind of bounce and the lightness of the Bournonville technique. Did you find that very difficult, or
it was very difficult? And I loved the style, and I was very eager to learn it. So by that time, they didn't have many foreigners, and the foreigners were obliged to take Bournonville classes. And I was among very few, me and my wife, that loved it and stayed from the beginning of the class till the end. We didn't leave because we wanted to learn it so much. And we made friends with some fantastic Bournonville teachers, older principals or character artists. And over there, I would say the biggest influence on me was the way they acted, the way they used mime, and their tradition of pantomime in the Bournonville ballets. I remember watching Giselle in one of probably first months after we arrived, looking not at the principals, but at the old couple. These roles were done by the character artists, the former principals. Probably it was Kirsten Simon and Fleming Ruberg or someone else. I just couldn't take my eyes away from them because it was so extraordinary. The way they created a complete realistic world on stage with very minimal, they had almost nothing to do. They just had to react. They didn't have any solo moments when they, take the spotlight. They were present, reacting on the action. But it was more interesting than anything that principals or soloists were doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was another moment that was important for me. I understood the mime. It's not a dead language. It's not something that you want to, fast forward and go on to dancing. If it's done well, it could be as impressive and as beautiful as celebration.
Mm-hmm. You started your dance career training at the Bolshoi, and when you finished your dance career, you were back at the Bolshoi as the artistic director. So those two bookends kind of envelop your dance career. But what I find really unusual is that you began in the Bolshoi and you started your new career in the Bolshoi, but in the middle, your dance career was never in Russia, and that's kind of unusual. Was that just your personal choice to get opportunities to travel around the world, or it just never happened that you had that opportunity to dance in Russia?
I remember being upset when I was not invited to join Bolshoi or any Moscow theaters. That was my goal at the school, but I very soon realized that it happened for a reason, and it indeed gave me a chance to learn very different dance traditions and to look at my Bolshoi training from a distance, because in Canada, I had to change myself, and I struggled at the beginning because it wasn't easy. At first, I was resistant, and I thought, oh, who is going to teach me? I am from the Bolshoi. I know better. And then when I was cast in Balanchine ballets, I realized that I can't do it well with my Bolshoi training. I need to adjust. I need to move faster. I need to have different musicality. And I just need to do it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And the same happened in Denmark. I had to learn, and I had to adjust, and I had to find a way to fit. And I always felt that when I was dancing Bournonville, it was learned, it was my native language. I always had corrections from the Bournonville people. Oh no, that was not exactly right. Here your head has to go the other way. You need to play less with your hands. You need to look more relaxed. Don't force it, and so on and so forth. So all that knowledge that I gained, I was eager to share with when I joined the Bolshoi as a director. And it wasn't a surprise for me that the dancers were resistant, because they thought they don't need that, they know better. Like I did when I just started my career. Exactly.
Yeah. Same. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about these stylistic adjustments that you made as a dancer, but I guess in the interest of time, we've got to move on and talk about the other aspects of your career, and then move on to the current situation. But just before I do, can I just take a moment to say that we normally invite our audience to ask questions, and I know that we didn't do that at the beginning. So can I just remind people that they can ask questions? And I've seen a note in the chat that says that the chat function or the question function isn't enabled. So can I just ask the London Ballet Circle admin people to have a look at that, because we'd love to have some questions from the audience later, but at the moment I think they can't ask them. Okay, so put that to one side. Let's move on to you as a choreographer, Alexei, because obviously your fame in the ballet world is, of course, as one of the world's greatest choreographers. And I'm interested to know, was it always your goal to become a choreographer from day one, from training? And if so, if not, what age did the idea of concentrating on choreography as opposed to being a dancer take root? How did that come about, that transition?
I would say from day two, not from day one. I remember the moment when I realized, having Vladimir Malakhov by my side in the class, we were classmates, that no matter how hard I try, I will never be a Malakhov. I will never jump that high. And I will never have the lines of his. And then I was very ambitious, and I thought, okay, where can I succeed? Another moment I remember well is that we were having lessons on musical theory or musical history, and we were the teacher would put on the LP and we would listen to the music during the class. And I would imagine the ballet as I hear the music. I would have a little TV in my head and I would have dancers doing steps. And I found it very entertaining. So from a certain moment, whenever I heard the music, I would do choreography in my head. I would say about 13, 14 years old, I think that's when it started. And immediately after I started to choreograph for my, classmates or roommates in the school, and we were doing little performances here and there. I was never encouraged. No one paid much attention, but it didn't matter for me because I knew that was interesting for me. I wanted to continue. When I when I joined Kiev Ballet, I think first year already, I grabbed some, dancers and said, okay, let's go into the studio to choreograph. And for some reason they agreed. We never performed it, but I remember spending quite a lot of time in the studio with them. And then when they excuse themselves and leave, I would grab someone else. Continued in Winnipeg in Canada, and I think that's the first time probably that my choreography was performed on stage with the audience. There was a workshop performances. And then I continued in Denmark. And then, yes, before Denmark, I think, when we returned back to Kiev, I choreographed for myself and for my wife, Tatiana, so we can go to the galas and, and gain some money.
So making small pieces for the two of you.
Small pieces, small gala pieces, yeah.
I'm fascinated, absolutely fascinated by this image of you having the little TV set in your head and, setting dancers to that in this TV set to music. And I just, you were doing that, as you said, from your teenage years. I just love the idea of you having to switch the TV off while you're learning steps that other choreographers are setting on you later in your career. That must be quite a difficult thing. Here you are thinking, well, actually, I do it that way. Was that an issue, or were you able to switch the TV off?
No, actually, I would switch on the recording. If I learn the new choreography from someone else, it goes into the same storage room that I take the steps for my own ideas later on. So, of course, I was very influenced by, well, in certain time, Bejar and Forsyth, of course, and Kilian, but mostly from Balanchine and later Ashton.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you were only 30, I think, if I've got it right, when you won your first Golden Mask Award, and still obviously a dancer for Dreams of Japan, which I think was one of two pieces you made for Nina in Georgia at the end of the 1990s. That seems to me to be a big breakthrough at a young age. Did it seem like that at the time?
It did. The Nina's invitation, that was a big breakthrough because she was not from my circle. I didn't know her before. She happened to see a gala or the concert that we were part of with Tatiana, and then after the performance she came backstage and gave me her card with a telephone number and said, I like your choreography. I would like you to choreograph a ballet for me. Because of her fame, these ballets were noticed, and they were successful. And the Bolshoi, I remember the Bolshoi went on tour to St. Petersburg, and even though these ballets were not part of the Bolshoi rep, they included it in a tour program, which was quite amazing. And that's how the Mariinsky saw it, and they invited me to do this triple bill for them. Yes.
Yeah, and then of course within a couple of years you were making your first 3-act ballet at Cinderella, which actually I have to say is my favorite Cinderella. I've seen it many times.
Oh, thank you.
And then very soon after that, the staging of The Bright Stream for the Bolshoi, which I've also seen several times. And I have to say, they both seem just as fresh and vivid each time I see them as the first time. I mean, that's a lot of reputation very quickly. So here you are making, you know, a major 3-act ballet for the Kirov-Mariinsky, and then almost immediately reinventing The Bright Stream for the Bolshoi. And you're still, you know, a very young man. It must really have been quite exciting times.
It was. I was also trying to continue as a dancer, and that was a very difficult moment, because when choreographing, especially full lengths, it's almost impossible to do classes or do anything else apart from really concentrating, preparing for every next day of rehearsals. And I remember my last year as a dancer with Royal Danish Ballet, I only participated in 2 programs in the whole season. It was obvious that I have to stop if I want to continue choreographing.
I have to say that it wasn't until today, when I was just, you know, finalizing my notes for this conversation, I hadn't realized, or I hadn't remembered that you made those ballets while you were still a dancer, taking a kind of sabbatical from Denmark in order to make them. And I can see exactly how difficult that must have been, and why it was so easy for you to have to make the decision to give up dancing quite young and concentrate on your choreography. And of course, it went beyond choreography very quickly, because after Bright Stream, you became the artistic director of the Bolshoi, just 36 in 2004. And taking artistic leadership of one of the oldest ballet companies in the world, and one that we know only too well now, especially, perhaps not so much then, was riven by factions, with the former long-term director Grigorovich still very much around, still very much in evidence. And it seems now, especially what happened to one of your successors, Sergei Filin, that it must have been both scary and exciting. But actually, how was it for you at the time?
Graham, you know, listening to you and trying to bring my mind back to these times, I'm struggling. It's, how to put it, I just don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
It's not because it was an exciting time, it was a dramatic time, I learned a lot, and it's just like The Bright Stream. I don't know if I want to see this ballet again. I don't know if it will be performed ever again.
Yeah.
Because, you know, by the time I choreographed it, I looked at the Soviet propaganda style as a style of the past. What happened in February tells us that this is very much alive. The propaganda, the Russian propaganda, is the cause of major catastrophe. The Russians didn't go out on the streets and didn't protest the war because they believe in what they hear. The propaganda started slowly taking the minds of Russians when Putin came to power in 2000. It was, you know, we all ignored it at the beginning, and day by day they increased the portions. And so, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And I definitely don't want to make you feel uncomfortable talking about this period of your life. And I understand exactly.
You know, to survive, to to be able to not to survive, of course. I'm in safety. People are dying every day, but to be able to function, I have to shut up this side of my history. I will come to the moment when I need to glue together my identity and come in peace with that Russian part of my life, but not at the moment.
I think that response is a very important one. So I think let's move on from the Bolshoi. But I wanted to say just one thing really, because one of my roles, as people in the audience know, is as chair of the UK National Dance Awards. And I mean, going back to that time, the company won the award for Best Foreign Company not once but twice in succession for the London seasons in 2006 and 2007. And Bright Screen, Whether It's Ever Seen Again, also won the award for Best Classical Choreography. 3 awards in 4 years in a country where the company only performed for 2 brief seasons seems pretty good going. And incidentally, Alexei, I have to tell you personally, you will know this already, you won the award for Best Classical Choreography in 2019 for the Shostakovich trilogy for San Francisco Ballet. And I still have that award because we've never given it to you. So hopefully we might be able to give it to you next week at the Coliseum. But I was just going to say, you've won so many awards over the years. Do they actually mean a lot to you?
Well, London awards do mean a lot.
Good, that's very good. I'm pleased to hear that. I'm sure we haven't probably seen the last of those. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in relation to those years, because it's very specific, is that I did have the pleasure of interviewing you at the Coliseum on the occasion of one of those tours. And we spent an awful lot of time talking about 2 young dancers, 2 incredible dancers that had burst onto the scene under your directorship. And I'm referring, of course, to Natalia Osipova and Ivan Vasiliev. And I know particularly with Natalia how much regard she has for you in terms of kickstarting in many ways her career. In fact, I was talking to her only yesterday and she asked for me to pass on her love to you. I mean, they were then so young. I think Natalia was 21 on the time of that interview with you, and Vasiliev was even younger. They were already becoming superstars, and I've always associated their rapid rise to your support as director during their early years. They're an amazing gift for any company, but they both left the Bolshoi within a couple of years of you going. And I just wonder whether that was, you know, they're looking for wider artistic opportunities, and in the same way that you were, and it clearly was the right thing for their career. But what are your recollections of nurturing them as young dancers? Because, you know, we have to support particularly Natalia here in London with all the things that she has said to distance herself from the Russian regime. You know, you're a big part in kickstarting her future, I think.
I remember so well seeing Natalia at her graduation in Moscow. That was very exciting to see such talent. She was like a very strong spiral pressed down, and then with every step it exploded. There was so much energy in everything she did. It was over the top, too much. And I remember riding a car together with a Stanislavski director, Dmitry Bryantsov, who was trying to convince me to not invite her to the Bolshoi so he can have her. And he said, I'll give her principal parts right away. And because her body is not so, you know, classically ideal classical type of the Bolshoi ballerinas, she will have troubles there. And I said, no, I'll fight for her. She's ours. When I've heard that Natalia and Ivan left the Bolshoi, I thought, what a pity, because for me, they are epitome of the style. They're so Bolshoi, both of them. But I'm very happy that Natalia found a home in London. I think it's a great place for her. With Ivan, I'm not so sure. He's choreographing, and I don't really know. But at the time, yes, it took some courage to cast them ahead of the established principles, and I had to fight for that. But
Yeah.
they were both so exciting that I had no doubts I'm doing the right thing. So
yeah, that was exactly the point I wanted you to get to, because I'm sure without you fighting for that, they would have been it would have taken them much longer to get their place, their rightful place in the pecking order. And those of us, including myself, in the audience who saw Natalia dance in the Laurentia Paradisis on Monday night, could still see that smack and that panache, that charisma. You know, at 36, she's still performing really at the top of her game. Let's move on. When you left the Bolshoi, you mentioned earlier that as a dancer, you auditioned twice for New York City Ballet. But I remember at the time, there was a rumor that you might go and join New York City Ballet as resident choreographer. Was that right? Was that ever in the offing? And if so, what happened? Why didn't that happen?
Yes, I was invited to join New York City Ballet by Peter Martins. However, when I presented my schedule and I had an invitation from the Mariinsky and the Bolshoi and another place to choreograph, and I did want to do these projects, he was very skeptical that you know, it's a good fit. He said, go freelance, and then when you have nothing else to do, we can speak again. So there was probably hand of fate or something. The next day after the conversation with Peter, which was honestly very disappointing to me, I got a call from Kevin McKenzie, and he invited me to be a choreographer at ABT, and I gladly accepted.
That sounds like a bit of ballet espionage. He knew you weren't going to New York City, and he was straight on the phone. But obviously that role, just moving a few hundred yards in New York, in 2008, that's been a long-lasting role, and you've been artist in residence at ABT now for, you know, all those years, and it's led to many new works on the company. Far too many for me to mention here, but I have to say one of my favorites on the Dnieper obviously has a relevance to current times, since the Dnieper is a river that flows from Russia through Belarus and Ukraine into the Black Sea. And I've got very fond memories actually of going to America and seeing Veronica Part and Marcelo Gomez dance on the Dnieper. You haven't been tied to one company, however, over this time, even though you've had this role at ABT. And you've obviously had the freedom to make many ballets elsewhere, such as your Romeo and Juliet in Canada, Paquita in Munich. And it's almost, I guess, a redundant question because the answer appears obvious, but it seems clear that you much prefer the opportunities to pick and choose different companies to work with, different dancers, rather than have your work limited in one place and one group of dancers. Is that the ideal for you?
I have to say that I'm very, very happy that Kevin asked me to join ABT, and he's been wonderfully supportive. And it's important to have the base. It's important to have the dancers that you know. And he also gave me the freedom. It's a luxury. You have a home and you have a freedom to go to other places. I feel that I learn from the dancers that I work with, and I'm excited when I start working with new company, because every company has its own style, way of working, and you just discover new things and you use them, and it's like different palette, different colors. I'm also happy to restage ballets that I've done already, changing little things and adjusting it for the new company. That also is a very fun process.
You like that? You like to revisit?
I do like
tinker with ballets you've already made in the recent.
There are ballets that I always change when I have a chance, and there are a few ballets that I actually leave the steps as they are. You don't change things.
I was just talking about your itinerants. You're certainly never in the same place for long. I mean, I saw on your Facebook page recently that you've been in, and I've got to read them all because there's too many. San Francisco, Munich, Dresden, Sydney, Melbourne, New York, The Hague, Amsterdam, Madrid, Seattle, and London in the past 6 months. Well, really over the course since the 24th of February. It's an amazing itinerary. And I just wondered what it's told you about the world's reaction to Putin's attempt to destroy Ukraine and its culture. Have you found the same wave of anger everywhere you've gone?
It was very strong in the first couple of months, and then it's faded, and then it's more. I still see it. You know, you go in you see a beautiful church in Melbourne. You open the door and you see Ukrainian flag and the box for donations. That's very touching. I think I'm afraid so. The war is going to continue. It's not going to stop tomorrow or after tomorrow. So I do feel that it's important that we keep pointing attention. You know, we keep telling people this is going on, these crimes, these horrors, these murders, and yeah. People's attention switch somewhere else, but such horrible reality is not disappearing anywhere. It's there, and I don't know. The more arms Ukraine receives, the more support Ukraine gets, the better chances are that it will win.
Mm. Well, I'm very much with you. I worry greatly that the Ukrainian situation is kind of dropping down the news agenda, and I think
another thing that scares me or worries me greatly is that, like with Ukrainian dancers, and I'm sure it's the same for any other field, you know, arts and science and education and stuff. With Ukrainian ballet, the majority of students left. They're studying somewhere else now. It means that when the peaceful time comes, we need to build all over again from scratch, because the students will probably stay attached to the new schools and probably will join the companies of the schools or whatever. You know, the majority of Ukrainian dancers have left. Some theaters are still giving performances, but this is a very small scale and mostly galas, not performances. So it has to be built all over again.
Yeah, and of course the ballet school in Kiev is one of the best schools in the world. Is it still functioning at the same level as far as you know?
It's not functioning now. Most of the students left.
Mm-hmm. That's terrible. When you think about the continuity of the history in that school, which I've been privileged to go to, you see it all around the walls and you feel it in the studios. It's a terrible thing that continuity has been interrupted. And the same with performances in the opera houses around Ukraine. It's a very worrying thing. I think that brings us full circle now, really, to the present. And I guess it's an appropriate time for me to now ask you how the idea of creating the United Ukrainian Ballet came about. Where did it begin? Who was the originator of it?
Early March, I received a call from Igoni de Jong. She is a former principal of Dutch National Ballet, and she was a brilliant dancer, a star. probably the best Dutch dancer for decades, maybe. And she said that she has a group of Ukrainian refugee dancers, and she asked for one of my ballets to be performed by them. And I was fascinated by the idea, and I said, whatever, I'll help in any way I can. At the beginning, she only had few girls, but then with the help of many people, the men received the, because they need a special permission, the men under 60, from 18 to 60, they can't leave the country. So they need a special permission from a Ministry of Culture. And she was able to gather almost 70 dancers now, which is amazing. The city of Hague gave them the old conservatory building. There are other Ukrainian refugees there, not only the dancers, but these 60 plus dancers with the kids, some with parents, with partners, they live there. It's not a comfortable hotel, but it's possible to live there. And they are given money and they can rehearse their classes. And we staged Giselle. We had 7 performances in Hague, and now we're super excited to bring this production to London. So apart from Igony's initiative, I got a call from another friend, Paul Godfrey, a London producer. I knew him from his work with Lilian Hochhauser when I came to London with Bolshoi Marinsky, who was always in charge of the production. And he said, he knows about the free week at Coliseum, someone canceled. And he asked me to think of a Ukrainian group who can perform. And then I just connected them too.
Disconnected. What a wonderful coincidence to be able to put those two things together. I had a note that you had 60 refugee dancers from all over Ukraine, Kiev, Odessa, Lviv, Kharkiv, Donetsk. You mentioned nearly 70 now, so the company's growing by the sound of it.
I think it's 60, 65, maybe. It's something like that. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it must be.
We also have some kids performing in Giselle.
Wow.
There was some
Yeah.
dancers kids from the same group.
But it's a huge logistical effort to put them all together, start a nascent company from scratch. You know, the logistical challenges really of creating a company from nothing really in the space of a few months. Amazing that the Hague have given it a base, which is fantastic. But I just really can't get my head around actually how difficult it must be to mount a full-scale production such as Giselle in the space of a few months with a company that only came together sort of weeks before. How was that before the premiere in The Hague last month?
You're right. It's not a company. It was a group of dancers from different. Some just graduated. Some were dancers with a professional company. Very different level. But you know, you learn to take it day by day, and you know, you have a group of men, and you go into the studio and say, okay, let's do a Albrecht solo. Let's try a variation. Let's try. So we had to learn who can do what, and then do casting. And then we discovered that we have quite a few people for that part, but this part we have no one. We somehow need to find a solution for that. It's been an amazing, really amazing process. I did it, and Tatiana, who rehearsed the corps de ballet, I mostly worked with the principals. We did it because we wanted to do something real for Ukraine, for our country. And some of these dancers didn't do class for a year or more because of also the pandemic just before that, you know. So it's challenging. but the first performance was very exciting. We had a fantastic audience response. At the end, we all sang Ukrainian anthem.
Wow.
That was a thing that I will never forget.
Yeah, I can imagine that would stay with you forever. I mean, of course, what we really want to happen is for the company to achieve its objectives and to be able, for the dancers to be able to go back to the companies from which they came and rebuild ballet in Ukraine. And I hope that happens as soon as it possibly can. Let's just, to end the conversation before we bring in the questions, just move from the company to the production. And I was going to talk about your reputation for, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but I'll say reconstructing ballets. Obviously, you have a long history of that, going back to the Bolshoi days. But of course, in recent years, you've really turned to the 19th century and you've renovated Paquita, Sleeping Beauty, Harlequinade, La Bayadère, and of course, in 2019, Giselle. I just wondered what drives you towards this process of revisiting, and if it is the right word, reconstructing these great classics of the ballet repertoire. Is reconstructing the right word?
Reconstructing the notations, because the steps are written down. The choreography of these ballets were notated during Petipa's lifetime. It was notated in Stepanov's system of notation, and it was done by Nikolai Sergeyev and his team. It's thousands of pages of the choreography. I wouldn't dare to call it the original choreography because we simply don't know, but it's the closest we can get to the original choreography. To reconstruct these steps, you need also many other materials. You need production books, you need reviews, you need images, you need to check all later productions, particularly British and Russian, to track sometimes Cuban and American ballet theater also, where immigrants, Russian immigrants worked. You need to track the traces of the original choreography and compare it to the notation. It's an absolutely fascinating process. The first time I worked with annotations in 2008 when we did the Corsair, the Bolshoi.
With Yuri Balaka, yes?
With Yuri Balaka. I realized how much information it gives and how much better the notated choreography is, how much more logical, musical, and interesting to my taste. You know, what we see today, most of the times, it's a dancer's choreography, because the virtuoso dancers want to show off and they change things. They want to do not just double in attitude, but double and double. They want to leave the leg higher and do a split. And then when they do a double two-run layer in the air, then they need to rest a little bit before the next step. So they cut something out. I can give many, many examples of these kind of changes, and it loses the original logic and musicality. So I was not satisfied. I didn't believe the classical choreo that it was Petipas or Ivanov. And the notations gave me the answer. I understood, oh, it was like, that's what it is. That's what was there. That's why he, you know, this step is on this music. This is musical accent for the particular step. So many discoveries. It's been absolutely, I believe in the notations in the original choreography, and I'm gonna continue working on it. It gives me so much material, food for thought. I use a lot of steps that I find in the notations in my own choreography. My vocabulary extended enormously because of these studies. I think my battery, sorry, is going off.
Oh, okay. Well, let's.
I need to switch on the cable. Just 1 second.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. We've got some questions coming in, so we're probably going to be a little bit longer. And I've got 1 or 2 more things that I wanted to ask you. If you just charge up.
Yes, I'm safe now. Good.
I mean, it seems to me the process that you're going through in these reconstructions, to me, is a little bit like renovating an ancient building. You're kind of scraping away all the modern paint and varnish that's been applied to an original facade to get back to something like how the original intentions were. But I just wondered, I mean, obviously your reconstruction of Giselle was for the Bolshoi, and it was just before the pandemic. And obviously I assume that for all kinds of reasons, logistical as much as anything else, the version that we're going to see at the Colosseum next week is going to be somewhat different. If nothing else, you have different sets and different costumes. And I know I haven't seen the Bolshoi, your version at the Bolshoi, but I know, for example, that at the end, Albrecht carries Giselle to a kind of grassy knoll area rather than she goes to her grave. But the set designs that you've got from BRB are not probably going to allow for that. So how different will the version be that we see next week?
It's going to be different visually, as you mentioned, different sets and different costumes. And here I have to mention Birmingham Royal Ballet and thank them for their generosity. It's been amazing to receive the sets and costumes for free. As well as orchestra, English National Opera Orchestra. Beautiful gesture of generosity that we're very thankful for.
We should all remember that. It's a wonderful collaborative thing, and I think BRB and E&O, E&B, they really should get our praise for that. Just wrapping up before we come to questions, Alexei, I just
wanted, sorry, Graham, I just wanted to say a few words about the differences with the Bolshoi production. So the numbers are different. We don't have 24 Willis. We have 18 Willis. We have less peasants. We have less hunt people. Some mise-en-scènes are different. And we continue, me and Tatiana, we continue searching for authenticity. So we discover new things. And we adjust, we change things that didn't quite work. The grassy, what did you call it?
No, like a mound, like a
little mound.
Area.
Yeah. We did build a new one because, of course, BRB designs don't have it.
Oh, that's great.
And by the way, the second act designs, we didn't use the Giselle designs. It's Ashton's The Dream forest.
Okay, interesting.
We're having for our second act for Giselle.
But the new material, the new old material, if I can put it that way, that you brought back, I think there's a dance for the Willis, for example, that we don't normally see in any recent Giselle. They're still going to be in this version, are they?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because really we do want to be as fair to the sources as possible. It's a matter of my, I would say, professional pride to be able to present the proof. Oh, that's where that comes from. That's why we do that step. I don't want to be very creative, and be a choreographer. I want to be to restore the original steps.
Wonderful. That's very helpful. I wanted to say that there doesn't seem to be a month at the moment where there isn't a new Ratmansky ballet on the horizon, and obviously in just 2 weeks, a fortnight's time, Pacific Northwest Ballet, which I have to say during the pandemic became one of my favorite companies, is going to premiere another new Ratmansky ballet in Seattle, appropriately entitled Wartime Elegy, and set to the music of the Ukrainian composer Valentin Silvestrov. is that something that you've developed really over the last few months, or is that something that's been in your mind to work on, you know, going back for some time, or is it particularly a response to the war?
I was very interested in the music of Silvestre for a long time, but for the first couple of months after the war started, I was not sure that I can choreograph. And then after I worked on Giselle in Holland, we premiered it mid-August, I think. The next day I left to Seattle, and that was the 2 weeks work. The ballet is short, it's only 15 minutes long. And I'm also using the paintings of Ukrainian painter Matvey Weisberg, a very good friend of mine, brilliant painter. So it is dedicated to Ukraine, and it's my response to what is going on, what is happening.
I think I'm right in saying, and if I'm wrong, then you can all hold me to account. I think that PNB are making it available to see online at some point. So even though Seattle's quite a long way for some of us to travel, I think we might still be able to see it. So that's something for the future. I'm just going to wind up with a couple of questions about the future, really, Alexei. My colleague, the dance critic Alistair Macaulay, who of course is chief dance critic of the New York Times, will A, be well known to you, and B, saw all of your work in North America. He wrote after seeing your Canadian Romeo and Juliet that you are, and I'm quoting here, the most gifted choreographer specializing in classical ballet today. I wouldn't disagree with that. It's a big tag to carry around, and given your intense knowledge of ballet history, your desire to reconstruct ballets and make them as they were, do you feel the pressure of this? Do you feel it a responsibility to pass on classical ballet in a better state than you found it?
Well, first, I'm grateful for Alistair for such grand words. I certainly don't feel that way, but I do feel a certain responsibility for introducing this newly found logic of classical ballets that I have in mind, and you know, with proofs on paper from the notations. I do hope that the audience like it and the dancers like it, and they understand and they feel what I feel, because I do believe that some changes really made a huge disservice to Petipa's choreographies. The extreme, you know, splits, the adding of endless pirouettes, and the cutting the choreography for transitions is something that is, you know, it's not great. It's not great. It's not. We're not seeing Petipa. We're not seeing Ivanov. We're seeing a collective, you know, collective choreography that has, maybe it's effective. It's a little bit like circus and the audience clap, but we're not seeing the work of the masters. It needs to be cleaned. It needs to be, first of all, it needs to be danced faster.
Yeah. It's a difficult question, but I think it's one that's very important and one that's been discussed around over the last 6 months. What do you feel will be the long-term consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the aggression against the Ukrainian people for the acceptance of Russian culture around the world? Do you think there's going to be a kind of cancellation of Russian culture?
Okay, this is not an easy question. my immediate reaction is that Russia successfully canceling its own culture in its own country. So many artists who are against the war are cancelled. Their performances are cancelled. They are not allowed to perform. They're not allowed to. They just disappear from cultural life in Russia, and it's not something new. We know of the most important Soviet artists that were either killed or imprisoned or exiled, suffered from the regime, and it's unfortunately coming back. For the acceptance of Russian culture in the West, well, on one hand, Tchaikovsky or Chekhov, they have nothing to do with Putin and his crimes. On the other hand, Swan Lake was and is a political tool for Russians. I don't know, it's very difficult. It needs a discussion, it needs a exchange of opinions, but I don't see how Ukrainians can, can take Russian repertory, for example, in Ukraine for some time at least, because the crimes, what you read about what the Russian army did in Ukraine is unbearable. It's just really horrible. It's comparable to what the Nazis did and what Hitler did.
Yeah, and of course, the horrors of what's happening in our continent, in Europe, are really quite staggering. But it really, for those of us who love ballet, it really brings it home to us. And I wanted to just finish really on this point. When you read, as we have done, of dancers who, instead of dancing on the stage at the Opera House in Kiev, are fighting in the army, and we know at least one of them has been killed. And you read, of a young student going to the Opera House in Donetsk with her teacher being killed in a bomb. I mean, that's the kind of personal reality that I think comes back to all of us who know and love ballet. And of course, it's just a tiny sample of the horrors that are going on. So let me end this chat before we come on to some questions, Alexei, where I began, and just to thank you for taking the stand that you have done, and for giving us leadership that I think the ballet sector needs. And you've given us a kind of international leadership, which we all applaud and get behind. So let me have a look at what the audience are saying, and it looks like we've got quite a lot of questions, and I'm probably not going to be able to get through them all, but let's have a go. Bruce says, I was intrigued by the glorious wit and passion, and certainly the piquant interverse drop-off exchanges in your ballet Voices for New York City Ballet. I wondered how the conceit concept came to be determined, as it seems so different from any of your other works I've been privileged to see. I'm also curious as to how you came to select those particular oral passages. Well, that's a very particular and specific question, but you might just give a quick answer to that one.
I can explain. My son his name is Vasily. He's a composer, and he's 24. So when I was about to do Voices, I asked him to suggest something more edgy, more contemporary, because he thinks my musical tastes are very old-fashioned. So that's how I discovered the music, and it was fascinating because it gives the rhythm of the speaking voices. in different languages, so very different intonation. And the what is it, counter balance between the piano and the spoken words opened the door that I never actually thought I would go there. That was very interesting for me.
Thank you. Because there are quite a lot of questions, I'm going to take them three at a time, actually. Christina refers to the fact that you mentioned that Ashton was an influence on your choreography. She says, can you tell us more about that? Which aspects of his choreography do you find most appealing? A simple question, I think, because we may already have answered it, is Fiona asks what other projects you have coming up. Well, we just talked about the PMB thing. There may be other things you might want to talk about. And a very specific question from Michael is to ask whether your version of Paquita is available on DVD, or whether you know that. So there's three questions. If you can deal with those in one go, Alexei, that would be great.
I start with the last one. No DVD of Paquita, but you can find Paquita on YouTube, I believe.
Everybody will go off looking for it later on. So,
okay. New projects. So I'm preparing a new production for Munich. It premieres in December, end of December. It's going to be overtures by Tchaikovsky. That's a project that was planned a long time ago. Shakespearean overtures, Hamlet, Tempest, and Romeo and Juliet.
And the other question.
What was the first one? I forgot.
The first question was about Ashton and what particular aspects of his choreography really appeal to you.
I started to appreciate Ashton more. I loved The Dream. I loved some other ballets of his. But I started to appreciate him more when I learned how to read the notations, because I saw how much he was influenced by the original Petipas choreography. My feeling is that he's the closest of Petipas successors. He's closer to Petipa than Balanchine or Nijinsky or the others, from the Russian Imperial School. I think that he was so influenced by the Russian immigrants, the White Russians who taught him the original variations, original steps, that he wanted to recreate this style. All these bands, quick transitions, changes of directions, and a great humor. I love his humor and his musicality.
Excellent. I think that's fantastic, Alexei. I said I was going to deal with these questions three at a time, but looking at the next three, they're all pretty difficult. So I'll take two of them. Fatima asks how challenging it was for you with the United Ukrainian Ballet to try and get a sense of identity when they all come from different companies. And David asks a very interesting question about your attachment to the music of Shostakovich, which of course you've made a fair bit of choreography to. He asks how his music and life has affected you as a choreographer, and whether your views about Shostakovich have changed since the war. So they're two quite challenging questions. So we'll just stick with those two for the time being.
About United Ukrainian Ballet. So the challenges were first to awaken their artistic inner sense, their mime. I wanted them to be more real, more present, more musical, not to be stylized, not to use the cliches that they used throughout their careers, and they teach the young ones, the graduates. The faster tempos proved to be the biggest challenge probably. And also the fact that some of them were very much out of shape. They didn't have a chance to do classes properly. Shostakovich. I think I've done quite a few ballets, and I probably said everything that I had about his music. Well, we'll see. I don't know. It depends on the day. But his music is a history of Soviet times and the challenges of these times, and his, contradictory position with the regime, because he was praised and then he was punished, and it changed from day to day. So he was the first composer I discovered for myself, and I loved his music for a long time, but I haven't listened to it for a long time already. I'm exploring new territories.
Thank you for that. Some questions are going to have to forgive me because I'm jumping some questions where I think we've already answered during the discussion. But Susan asked about the process, your process of making a new ballet. What comes first, music or story idea? And she asked about the casting. Do you have the leads in mind when you're working on the concept, or do you wait until you get into the studio and see the dancers before making choices?
It is different every time, but I would say most of the times I need to find the music that inspires me. Not only that I like, but also that I can imagine the ballets danced, because not all great music can be danced. Some music is danceable and some is not. But most of the times it comes from the music.
Great. Amy, who I know is quite an expert on petit pas, asks a very specific question about the fact that you were in the process of staging the Pharaoh's Daughter in St. Petersburg at the time of the invasion, and what's going to happen to that. I mean, I'm assuming it's probably dead in the water, but over to you.
Yeah, I received a letter from the Mariinsky that they continue with this project without me.
Okay, well, that's a straightforward answer.
But I did. So I did about 2 hours of choreography, reconstructed choreography, and we had 3 runs through of the material. It is filmed, and it's a very painful subject, because I think that first of all, this fits Mariinsky like a glove. No one can do it better, and no one probably needs it. Mariinsky needs this ballet.
Moving on quickly, Alison asks about 24 Preludes for the Royal Ballet. You were scheduled to revise it. Are you still hoping to do that? And given that many of the original cast are no longer available, would you prefer to create something new on new dancers?
I would love to revive 24 Preludes. I actually did in Vienna, and we had different designs, and it worked much better for my taste. So I would love to go back to this ballet, if possible.
Fantastic. Alistair asks a very interesting question about your experience of Baryshnikov. He says, since he is also a muscle dancer like you, did he have any influence on your career? And if you met him, did you think about doing any projects together?
I worked with Misha, and it was really an amazing experience. When I choreographed a little piece for him in Copenhagen, he had a cold, so he never did anything full out. He just marked it. And then we met in New York. He called me and said, come to my studio, I'll show you, because he was about to perform it. And I was in tears, because I never worked with a dancer as intelligent, as clever, as artistically genius as him. I saw the material that I gave him completely transformed. It was very moving.
Wonderful. I tell you, we have got some very expert questioners here. Rosie, another one I know very well, says I'm fascinated by the difference in performance style between Alexei's reconstructions of the Sleeping Beauty and Giselle. Beauty was performed in a style noticeably referencing the late 19th century, earlier 20th century, whereas the Bolshoi Giselle seemed to be danced in a more late 20th, early 21st century style. Could you comment?
Yes, I would say that after Sleeping Beauty and Paquita, I realized that this style that I was inspired by and trying to impose, right? That it alienates quite a big part of the audience. And the dancers don't find it easy. Some adapt well, but some struggle. And I just wanted to avoid that. I wanted to, to have a little easier reaction from the audience and the dancers as well, because as I said, I would like that style, and that, not the style, but the choreography, the steps, the connection with the music to be appreciated, and to, maybe it's too ambitious, but to take over, to get these original steps back on stage. I would like people to see the qualities of it.
Excellent. The next two comments I'm not going to read out because they're quite long, but I hope we can get these things to Alexei, because first of all, from Anna in Spain, and then from Martha, who I believe is in Amsterdam. They're just beautiful tributes to you. And it's nice to see that we've got people attending from all over the place, which is great. Teresa raises a really interesting point. She says she's hugely interested in the Giselle restoring. And she asks if there will be a conference or essay made of the restoration, the changes, or perhaps a workshop. What a great idea. I mean, maybe we should organize it and charge people and give the money to the Ukrainian charity. I think that's brilliant. But is there anything like that in the offing, Alexei?
Nothing is planned, but I think it's a great idea, and I would love to participate if someone organizes it.
Well, that's the challenge. Let's see if there's a few of us here who'll help to organize it. I think that's a great idea. Another tribute from Jennifer, who says she loved your Sleeping Beauty for ABT. Yeah, just a tribute, not a question. Sebastian has a very simple question. He says, you said that when restoring classical ballet, it needs to be danced faster. Could you please say more on this?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the extensions and also the coordination of today's dancers, who they want a perfection in everything. They spend too much time in the transitions. They present the transitions as big steps, as major steps. They're just not fluent in phrasing. The transitions should be transitions, and the big steps should shine. So, yeah, when the leg goes 180 degrees, it takes time to get it up and then down. That's the main thing.
And the very, very last comment is not a question, so you don't have to answer it, but actually it's so nicely put that it's almost a perfect conclusion to the interview. And it's from Imogen, so well done, Imogen. And she says, many thanks for this powerful and fascinating interview. I admire you so much, Alexei, as a very great choreographer, artist, and human being. I don't think any of us could have said that better. So I think that's a brilliant way to close and to hand over to Susan, who I think is just going to say the final remarks. And just, Alexei, for me, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is mine. And thank you for the kind words. Thank you for support.
Thank you so much, both of you. I don't know what to say. It's just been an amazing evening. It's been an absolute privilege and an honor to have you with us, Alexei. We are all so eager to see Giselle next week. I know I will be there the first night and probably have a box of tissues with me because I think it's going to be a very emotional evening. What you're doing is incredible. Is there any chance that this will be seen around the world? Will it tour? Will there be a DVD? I ask because we have people watching from North America, from Australia this evening, and they're here because they care not only about Ukraine, but about what you do in that. And it would be wonderful if they were to have a chance to see this too.
There were some talks about streaming, but I'm not sure it's been organized. Maybe in the future.
We'll wait and hope. But again, it's just been a total privilege. Thank you for all you've done and for the respect you show for the historical ballets. That is it's so wonderful to know that these are going to live on and as they were made. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time. I know it's been a very busy time for you and very emotional. And so thank you. And we will all be there next week cheering for the Ukrainians. And thank you, Graham. As always, a wonderful job. So good night, everyone. And stay safe, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.